Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran trying to soundtrack a Barry Levinson movie with a 78-piece orchestra, or else a scrappy upstart soundtracking a friend's Vimeo short with a MIDI keyboard, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the fourth Friday of July 2021, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Kit who drove a Kia Sportage with tinted windows and who was always trying to sell you bath salts that he had packaged in short Pringles containers. And old Kit would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in: hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music, and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on YouTube for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. Every Sunday night, I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I'd like to say that we're building something of a community over there on Sunday nights, including many people who are listeners to this podcast. So come on over, be a part of it. Every Sunday night, 9 p.m. Eastern on YouTube. Head on over to YouTube and search for Joe Pug, or go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab. Finally, if you enjoyed this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show, and you won't miss a few bucks at the end of every month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thanks to everybody who's already done that. I really appreciate it. And if you're not in a place to contribute in that way, I totally understand. There's still a few ways that you could help out our show for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I really hope that you enjoy this week's episode. Our guest this week is a former staff writer in Nashville who is now hanging his own shingle and leaning into his solo career. Sean McConnell grew up in Massachusetts. Both of his parents were folk singers, and music was an integral part of their household. After attending college in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, he moved to Nashville and signed a publishing deal with Warner Chappell. His songs have been recorded by Meatloaf, Tim McGraw, Martina McBride, Rascal Flatts, Plain White Tees, Brad Paisley, and many others. His songs have also appeared in the ABC television show Nashville. In 2017, the song Mercy, which he co-wrote with Brett Young, went on to #1, marking the first time one of his songs topped the charts. He's recorded for Rounder and Big Picnic Records. No Depression has called the songs on his last album sincere and inspiring. American Songwriter says that same album features his most soulful vocals to date, and Rolling Stone Country has called him one of the nation's most acclaimed songwriters. Besides being a songwriter who I admire a great deal, Sean is a friend of mine, and when I noticed that he had a new album on the horizon, I figured that was as good an excuse as any to corral him back onto the podcast. So his new album, A Horrible Beautiful Dream, is out August 6th, and we had the chance to catch up on the phone and talk about everything he's been up to creatively since the last time we spoke. Sean McConnell, thanks so much for coming back on the Working Songwriter podcast. One thing I'd like to ask you and start with is a subject that will probably get about 80% of our audience tuning out because they're not going to be interested, but I don't care because I'm really interested. You've been building a new studio recently at your place, or maybe just adding on to the studio that you had last time that we talked. I'm always following along on the grams. Talk to me about that project of putting the studio together. How did it start?
Yeah, I mean, when tours got canceled and everyone was rethinking, musicians and many other, everyone really was rethinking kind of what the next year was going to look like. I kind of doubled down on my producing, which I do a lot of, even during a typical year, but not to the degree that I have been doing it now since I've been off the road. So, the studio has its own space and has grown exponentially, which was a fun process in itself. But basically, since August, when it was completed, I've been making records here. I think I'm on record 6 since August, and it's been a whole new chapter for me creatively, and the studio has been a massive part of that, and it's been counting our blessings and the hard things of the last year. This studio has been a huge blessing for sure.
Did you go whole hog and professionally soundproof the place and all that, or did you kind of do that soundproofing and stuff and the construction yourself, and you're taking out extra noise with software and plugins afterwards?
Kind of neither. I just, my philosophy with it was I wanted it to be a house that was a studio. So I didn't want to gut the walls and run all the stuff. I did a lot of sound baffling, building sound acoustic panels, probably 30 or 40 of them, and put them in the rooms that needed to be in, and covered up some windows. And there's a few smaller jobs like that, and then all the wiring is run under the house. I know now everyone's really tuning out from the podcast, but
no, that's my whole goal here, apparently.
Let's see how few people will listen to this episode. I lucked out with this building has a really tall crawl space, so I ran all the wiring that you normally run through the walls under the house, which meant no construction. And so we've done a lot, but it's all been not too invasive, and it's great. It's all dialed in, and we're making music and pretty capable to cut pretty much anything out here right now, which has been just a blast.
Yeah, definitely. We lost most of our listenership there, but the 3 people who are continuing to listen have been waiting for a very long time to hear someone reference a tall crawl space on this podcast.
Now we're really getting down to our core listenership here today.
What kind of technically? What sort of gear? Is there a console that your studio is based around, or what sort of technical stuff do you base your creative workflow around?
I don't have a console per se. the kind of heart of my studio is I've built my own little console out of API 500 units. And to get extra nerdy for the one person that's left listening, it's all the classic API company Cappy, which I think you're familiar with. You have some of their preamps as well.
Love them all.
So I know they're so good. Jeff does an amazing job. So I've kind of built my own Cappy heavy, preamp section, and then UAD is all my I/O and the brains of the operation. And obviously, I use the hell out of all their plugins and stuff. But I do have plans for a console in the next few months that will be in addition to all that stuff. But
what are you getting?
As of right now, we have. I think I'm gonna get a Yamaha PM1000, like fully modded. It's like a Neve, a 70s Neve ripoff. That are super fun and easy to mod. So I've always been obsessed with those. So I think I'm going to do that in addition to what I have. But as it stands, we're a full 24 channels, and it's all rocking.
What do they have to do to boards like that from the 70s to modify them for more modern studios?
I don't know much about that, but for this specific board, you can get a mod for the D sub outputs. And then the really popular mod is an EQ mod. So you mod the EQs to the Neve points, basically replicate all the points that a Neve EQ, like a 1073 has. So those are kind of the two main modifications, other than just cleaning things up and recapping some stuff.
See, this is one of the advantages of living in Nashville, that you could, what you're describing right there, like there's a guy or a gal in Nashville that can say, yeah, I do that. Bring it on over to my place, pay me a couple $100 and I'll get it done.
Yeah, it's true, man. I mean, Nashville there's everyone to do everything here. It's crazy. We are very spoiled.
So how does your workflow look different in this new space? Does it look different, or have you been inspired in a different way? Are you able to do things that you didn't used to be able to do, or is it just a pretty straightforward continuation of what you had been doing before?
Man, it's opened up excuse me, hold on one second. All right, now we have 0 listeners. It's really opened up quite a different process for me, just in that, I have it set up so that there's a really live sounding room, a really dead sounding room. There's an amp room. There's 4 or 5 different options. I've got an organ here. The instrument choices have grown. And just there's just so much room for trying out new mic placements for the drums or for whatever. It's just, trying out different room mics and throwing a mic in the hallway between the A room and the B room. The space itself has really sparked. Yes. Just, before I was in one room and there's only so many places you can move a mic, right, and only so many places that sound good in one room. That's pretty much a bedroom that you're trying to make a studio. So yeah, the space itself has become an instrument in the different sounding rooms, and it's also just become a place. The past 5 artists that have cut here, the 2 rooms upstairs are still bedrooms, so they're guest rooms. So people come here for kind of the running process has been people come here for 2 weeks, and we write, record, do it all and they stay here on the property. So that has created almost this experience, where you get to come and live somewhere and make a record.
Wow. And almost from start to finish. I didn't realize that the writing process would be a part of that. Is that people coming in and they have some stuff that they've worked on and you help them refine it? Or is that them showing up at your doorstep with, a toothbrush and a tube of chapstick and walking out with a record fully afterwards?
The tube of chapstick.
I think that's a Corky St. Clair line from Waiting for Guffman, but yeah.
I like it. It really does speak volumes. Yeah, it's been all the above. There's been a couple of records where people might have 5 or 6 songs, and then they come here and we write the other 4 and beat out a couple of the originals. Mm-hmm. there's been people who have a fully fledged idea, and maybe we get lucky and we write a couple that beat out a few. But like a couple weeks ago, I had an artist in here, and we went in with an experimental mindset of let's not have anything, and we'll do it for 2 weeks, and we'll write and record a song every day. And it turned out fucking awesome. It was so much fun. And so it's a bunch of different ways it can go down, but I really am so about the song, and if I'm producing a record, I just want to help the artist have the best songs possible.
That's really walking a high wire like that, man.
Yeah, it was, but something about that made it exciting, and I don't know, it was like a challenge we were really stoked about, and it paid off, thank God.
Right. Now, how do you work with something like that? I've worked in some ways like that before, but the problem that I really run into, particularly when I'm writing and then getting it recorded at the same time, is if things are going smoothly, it feels really good and it feels like the only way to do it. But if I hit a wall with it, if I hit a place where it's just sounding like a thing, basically, the only thing I can really do at that point is I roll it up for the day, go home, watch my kids, go to sleep, come back the next day. Maybe I can make some headway the next day in some way, but I have a really hard time in the moment if I hit a wall, continuing on, particularly when it's being recorded and written at the same time. I'm sure you guys must have hit a wall or two like that. So how did you get through and continue working?
Yeah, I mean, obviously that happens, and I'm with you. Sometimes if, it'll be, let's just call, if it's kind of later in the day, you can say, let's just call it. I'm gonna go home. I'll be with my family, and like you said, wake up and start fresh and hope that the muse is back in the room. But more often than not, it's more like, hey, let's go out on the porch and like have a beer and not think about music for an hour or two, have some dinner.
Right.
Go walk in the woods, just clear our heads. And I think that when you're with people that you know and trust and have a good rapport with, those moments are less stressful because everyone knows that shit just happens,
Right.
As opposed to if you're with a client or something that like you're still getting to know each other and you're sitting there thinking like, I hope they're not like bummed out that we're not like totally crushing it right now. And then you start overthinking it and they start overthinking it. And I tend to, I'm not making 30 records a year. I won't always be producing at this pace once touring starts back up. So I'm kind of getting to pick and choose or enter into records that I believe in and people that I know. Maybe not as friends from the get-go, but we take the time on the front end to like actually hang and break some bread. And it makes all of those problem moments not that big of a deal.
I just love the idea of someone coming to work with you and then it getting silent for a second and then being like, Sean, we're not fucking crushing it right now. And that's what I'm paying you for.
Dude, I was distinctly told that you would just crush it all day, and that's not what is happening.
My manager said you were going to crush it. I'm going to fire him.
Oh, gosh. It makes my stomach turn.
Yeah, no, that's...
Man, and the more I do it though too, the less, there'll always be those moments, but the less moments like that there are. I just said that like Yoda. There are less moments like that. Just when you have the kind of the studio dialed in, and that I'm not worried about that side of things, and really we're just in the song zone. To the best of my ability, I have everything set up to where those moments are fewer, but they always come along, and that's what separates the hobbyists from the professionals, I guess. You got to figure it out.
It's funny. I had a thought like that recently about last tour I did with these musicians, and it was great. And I was thinking about like in my early 20s, how difficult it was to get things sounding good all the time. And I'm like, oh, it's a good thing I'm doing it this way now. And I was like, wait a second. I think it just means that I'm getting older, because when I was in my early 20s playing with other musicians, I didn't know how to do anything. They didn't know how to play their instruments. So, of course, it wasn't great all the time. But then as you get older, it just means that we're getting older, I think, and people are just more competent now. Those are the people we're hanging with.
Yeah, you wake up and you're 37 years old and you've been doing it for 20 years. It's like, oh yeah, it's probably good that we know what the fuck we're doing, because it's all we've been doing for
Really
our whole lives. You're right.
Now, one thing that I've found this last year, I've been working out of, admittedly, a much more bare bones studio situation at my house, but my own thing. And one thing that I do miss from working in other places is I really miss going into other people's studios and seeing their workflow, because even if I didn't like everything that they were doing, even if I only liked 5% of what they were doing, I could still steal that 5% and bring it home.
Totally.
And now I find myself when I'm at home a bit, I mean, I can get some stuff from some engineers that I love who've put some stuff up on YouTube and just kind of getting their idea of it, but it's still not the same as walking into someone else's place, seeing their rig, seeing them do something that way. I'm sure you've ran into a similar challenge. How are you continuing to learn, I guess is what I'm asking.
A few ways. One thing is we are at the point we're still extremely quarantined.
Mm-hmm.
But we have, if people, well, now with vaccinations, it's opening up even more, but if people are quarantining to the extent that we are and taking it seriously, we have had opportunities for other people to come in and work here in a safe way. And for instance, a buddy of mine, Justin Tockett, who's a fantastic engineer, and runs Dockside Studios in Maurice, Louisiana. He was up here, we were working on a project together, and it was the first time in my studio I had the luxury of being like, you engineer it, I'm going to produce it. And then we had the artist, which was absolutely a blast and was extremely liberating. But also, I got to pick his brain about all the choices he was making and look over his shoulder at how he was EQing certain things or miking certain things. So there's some of that going on. A third thing that I try to do as a rule of thumb, I can't remember where I heard this, but if you try one new thing every day, by the end of a year, you've done a lot of new stuff. So whether that's something as small as like, normally I have the room mic right here. Well, I'm going to put it over here today. Just little things like that where you stumble upon your own shit that works. And then thirdly, I haven't watched them a lot lately, but especially for a few months there, I was deep into, God, I can't even remember what subscription it is, but one of those websites where you get to mix. It's not mixed with the masters, but it's
something
another
along
one.
those lines. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Which I was kind of skeptical about, but I was like, it's not too much money. Let me just look. And I really thought I would have paid 4 times the amount that I did. It was so, if you can be in the room, quote, with Vance Powell for literally from the beginning to end of a song.
Yes.
It's the tools at our fingertips are really insane.
Yes.
The things we get to see. And people are so eager to share. People that are actual pros and that know what they're doing, they're not like the guys that are like, oh, I've got this secret microphone I'm not going to tell you about. They're like, no, here's what I do.
Yep.
Go, do it yourself and make your own thing with it.
It's and that's a subscription thing that you're talking about there, which you even mentioned. It's like not even that much money, but like even the free stuff that's on YouTube is, I mean, in some ways I feel corny saying like, I'm learning this from YouTube, but when you actually think like what YouTube is, it is probably a better education than a lot of people would be getting in 1985 going to engineering school in, Utah somewhere. Not to shit on Utah, but you get what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, you're right, dude. I mean, I went to Middle Tennessee State. I did music business, but I did take some production classes. Mm-hmm. And that's super hands-on and informative, but there's a difference when you get to see someone's process like in real time, and there's all these super competent engineers, whether they're famous or not, that are just literally, here's 5 hours of me micing a drum kit and running a session. And,
Yep.
like you said, even if you only like 5% of what they did and the rest of it sounds like shit or doesn't work for you, you're like, well, I just got a new tool in my tool belt.
Yes. Yeah, and getting those new tools in the tool belt, I find, can be real. It's kind of heady stuff. It makes me excited to work on the music itself, and obviously the songs are what matter. But like, last month, I spent like a week or so just going down this rabbit hole of like, what's gain staging? How do I properly gain stage a whole band track? And I just got so excited from working on that type of stuff that I ended up like writing a lot of songs in that week just because I was excited about a technical breakthrough for myself,
Yeah, absolutely, man. I share that. I'm at this point, I call it an illness. I have an engineering illness. I obsess about it. I go to sleep thinking about it. I wake up thinking I'm going to try this and that. Yeah. And it really does. I mean, the song comes first, absolutely. Yes. But that side of things is so intoxicating to me. And like you said, it does breed music. Like, it's just like if you pick up a certain guitar and there's a song in it, we all know how that feels. Like, it's a yes. whole different sound, and all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, I gotta write the song. I mean, you really can say the same thing about a compressor, as stupid as that sounds. Like, if you're getting a sound that is inspiring you, it, for me at least, often it does spark a song or at least a melody or a riff or something.
Yes. No, indeed. I have the same thing where my mind is always running on that stuff. I feel like I'm a part of some Instagram meme where it's like my wife is wondering what I'm thinking about when I'm distant. And she's like, is he thinking about another woman or something? I'm just thinking, God, that snare sounds like garbage. That's it.
Dude, you might have to figure out a way to make that into a skit. I can totally see that. Or at least a meme.
We'll send it to Music City Memes, right?
Yeah, so you can make the cut.
So you managed in this time, you've been recording records for other folks, producing for them. And in this time, you managed to record your new record, which is coming out imminently. There's a few singles out already. Talk to me about putting this new record together. Did you have to set aside time to make this, or were you working on this in the gaps for other projects that you were working on for friends and other projects and for clients?
I set aside time for sure. As soon as the studio happened, we booked a lot of records. And so mine was one of them, and I marked off the calendar for it like I would the other projects, just so that they all got their due attention. Those overlap, and it always takes twice as long as you think. But I set aside time, and I had already been, writing, and pretty much knew my 10 favorites that would become a 13-song record, because I did write more while I was recording it. But it was a real blast to be doing it in the studio versus the upstairs bedroom that I recorded Secondhand Smoke in, which on its own was so much fun, and figuring out a way to do that in a small room. But I felt like just a kid in a candy store with a new studio and all these new songs, and it was a very different experience, but amazing experience.
You posted something, I think it might have been while you were working on this record of your own, of you were playing a piano part to some part of the recording, and you kind of talked about in the post how, a musical moment, an artistic moment, sometimes it happens once, and it's the first time through, and that's it, and you better make sure that you capture it. Can you kind of speak to that ethos and how you've learned to capture those sort of moments over time?
Yeah, I do think there is something to that, and I don't always capture them, and sometimes it's lack of time, or you're running so fast that you're not ready to actually properly capture the first take of this or that. But I do think that most of the time, the first couple of times you play a song, it's exciting, and it won't ever be that exciting again in that way, because it's almost that feeling of like when you first learn to play the guitar, like just when you finally strum
Yeah.
a G chord or whatever, and it's like actually rings out, and you're like, holy shit, this is the best feeling I've ever had.
Yes.
Like, but then you go on and you play for 20 years, and maybe you take playing a G chord for granted. I think when you first write a song, you're so excited about it, and you're still figuring it out, so it's not so locked in.
Yes.
It's not so methodical. And the older I get, the more I'm more enticed by performances that have little mistakes or that are super raw or just have these edges on them that fight against like perfection. And I think that when whether it be a vocal or like a full band take or even like a performance on a piano or a guitar, there is something about that first one or two passes that you won't ever get back again because your brain automatically starts to refine it, which you've trained it to do. But there's something super just guttural and I don't know, just kind of rock and roll about the first couple of times you do anything. So I always try to, I keep going back to my engineering brain, which I don't know why I keep defaulting there, probably because that's where I'm living right now, but I try to be prepared for that. So even if we're singing a quote scratch, I'm running it through my channels and, engineering it like this might be the thing, because it probably will be.
Yes. No, indeed. So basically what you're saying is even if you wrote the equivalent of I wish you were here tomorrow, you wouldn't feel the same burst of joy that you did the first time you were able to play Smoke on the Water on a guitar.
Exactly. That is well said. Well said.
I have a younger nephew. I guess he's my nephew and not my cousin. You know how that works. He's my nephew, and he's learning guitar. He's 12 or 13, and watching him, he came and showed me he can play "Come as You Are" now, right? So it's kind of weird that 30 years ago the first thing that you were learning on guitar is now still the same thing that people are learning first thing on guitar, but watching him play "Come as You Are," it was just like the sheer how authoritative he looked and how happy and pleased with himself that he looked. I'm like, man, I haven't felt that happy about figuring something out in about 30 years. He looks so damn happy about playing "Come as You Are."
Dude, it's so true. It's like, can't you remember that feeling of just? I remember bringing in, I had a handful of guitar lessons when I was a kid, and I brought in Smashing Pumpkins' Bullet with Butterfly Wings because I was obsessed with that song.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's such an easy song to play, but it's just like your little brain explodes with possibilities of how it feels, and like, I mean, there's no words to describe it, but yeah, it's there is no other, it's a very specific feeling.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. The feeling of learning a song that you've always loved on guitar for the first time, or the feeling of writing a song and singing its melody for the first time, is certainly a kind of high, as Sean was describing. And when you're working on a creative pursuit, the goal is to be in that flow state as much as possible. When that happens, it's almost like experiencing a little piece of heaven on earth. And there's a wonderful poem by Dick Allen that describes what he'd like to experience in heaven, which sounds very similar to this sensation that Sean and I were describing. It's entitled, "If You Get There Before I Do." Air out the linens, unlatch the shutters on the eastern side, and maybe find that deck of bicycle cards lost near the sofa. Or maybe walk around and look out the back windows first. I hear the views magnificent. Old silent pines leading down to the lakeside, layer upon layer of magnificent light. Should you be hungry, I'm sorry, but there's no Chinese takeout. Only a general store. You passed it coming in, but you probably didn't notice it's one weary gas pump along with all those Esso cans from decades ago. If you're somewhat confused, think Vermont, that state where people are folded into the mountains like berries in batter. What I'd like when I get there is a few hundred years to sit around and concentrate on one thing at a time. I'd start with radiators and work my way up to Meister Eckhart. Or, why do so few people turn their lives around? So many take small steps into what they never do, the first weeks, the first lessons, until they choose something other, beginning their lives, so never knowing what it's like to risk last-minute failure. I'd save blue for last, Klein blue, or the blue of Crater Lake on an early June morning. That would take decades. Don't forget to sway the fence gate back and forth a few times just for its creaky sound. When you swing in the tire swing, make sure your socks are off. You've forgotten, I expect, the feeling of feet brushing the tops of sunflowers. In Vermont, I once met a ski bum on a summer break who had followed the snows for 7 years and planned on at least 7 more. We're here for the enjoyment of it, he said, to salam into joy. I expect you'll find Bibles scattered everywhere, or Talmuds or Korans, as well as little snippets of gospel music, chants, old Advent calendars with their paper doors still open. You might pay them some heed. Don't be alarmed when what's familiar starts fading. As gradually you lose your bearings, your body seems to turn opaque and then transparent until finally it's invisible. What old age rehearses us for and vacations in the limbo of the Middle West. Take it easy, take it slow. When you think I'm on my way, the long middle passage done, fill the pantry with cereal, curry, and blue and white boxes of macaroni. Place the checkerboard set, or chess if you insist, out on the flat-topped stump beneath the porch's shadow. Pour some lemonade into the tallest glass you can find in the cupboard. Then drum your fingers, practice lifting your eyebrows until you tell them all. The skeptics, the bigots, blind neighbors, those damn with faint praise critics on their hobby horses, that I'm allowed. And if there's a place for me that love has kept protected, I'll be coming. I'll be coming too. So, was your writing style, since the last time we talked, I think we talked pretty close to when Secondhand Smoke was about to come out, your last record, or had just come out. What have you learned in the last 2-3 years? What have you added to, not your engineering tool belt or not the things going on with the studio, but just the hands-on writing of the lyrics of a song or the melody or the entire song itself? What have you added there as a writer? What have you learned better to do? What other techniques do you have now that you maybe didn't have last time we talked?
Man, that is an interesting question. I think that I'm hopefully letting go more, in that I think a lot of songwriters speak of their best songs being the ones that felt like they were just handed out of the sky, or that they don't even remember writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying, I'll say, to be in a place mentally, spiritually, physically, to walk into this studio and have more of those moments. Not that we're in control of them, but if one is there, I want to maybe receive it more easily than I would before. And so I don't know. I'm trying to cultivate in my songwriting a preparedness for those moments, and trying not to like squeeze the life out of shit like I used to, perfection wise. I don't know. I guess a short answer to a long, instead of a long answer, is just letting go more, trusting the process, the muse, whatever those things actually are, to get out of the way more. And I think fun is a great vehicle for that to happen. I think we've all had a lot of moments where making music isn't fun, but I've been really cultivating having fun in the studio, and I think that kind of allows the muse to creep on in and do her thing without you really even noticing it.
How do you create that culture on a practical level?
I think just keeping the energy positive, not in a fake way, but just I'm legitimately excited to be in a studio writing, or even on Zoom. Like, that's a hard one for me because I really, really hate writing on Zoom if it's a co-write.
Right.
But just trying, instead of in my mind being like, oh, this is going to suck. I'm so fucking over Zoom. I hate COVID. This is blah, blah, blah. Just being like, we could walk away with a magical song, and trying to keep that energy like in my own self, and then, with whoever I'm looking at, whether it's in the room or over the computer. And if it's here or in wherever, in another studio, it's really just about, I don't know, just like reminding myself and other people, like, holy shit, we get to do this for a living. Like, this is so cool. Like, wouldn't our 16-year-old selves like freak out if they knew that we were still doing this and keeping the lights on, and just kind of geeking out about like how fun music can be. Now, it's not like that all the time. I don't want to paint like a picture that I don't have those moments where I feel like I'm probably never going to play guitar again and I'm the worst songwriter on the face of the planet. Those days happen as well, but yeah, on the whole, I try to just have fun.
Those days do happen, and those days for me, they do happen just as often. I think now I'm just a little bit older and I can just kind of recognize them while they're happening and just say like, all right, well, yeah, like you're totally bummed out, man, but maybe it's because it's just because that's the way that life works sometimes, and you're not always going to be excited about a project, and just, go to bed and wake up tomorrow, man. It'll still be there and it'll come back.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think we all have that fear, that elephant in the room of like, oh man, maybe I'll never make another record like that'll be better than this one, or write a song that'll be better than this one, or maybe like I'll wake up one day and I won't even ever write a good song again, which is all just bullshit. It's all mind games. So yeah, I think you're totally right. Like, the older you get, you're like, yeah, well, here we go again. This is a bad day. I'm just going to lick my wounds, go home, be a real human with my family, and then show up tomorrow, and it'll probably be better.
And what's interesting is, you mentioned there, like the worry that I have as well of like, will I ever make a record as good as that one, whatever that means. And it's like, that is assuming that how good a record is a thing that is fixed over time. You know what I mean? When that's not the case at all.
Right.
How people interact with a piece of art changes over time, for good and, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, but how people deal with it depends on the culture, the musical zeitgeist at the time, how people feel. So it's, I think it's a real mistake. I try to remind myself that it's a mistake to look at an album's worth as something that can be fixed over time. I've made albums that I personally think were pretty darn good that maybe over time I begin to like less and less. And the opposite has happened for me as well.
Right. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I also think it's the kiss of death to enter into the comparison game, whether it's with somebody else or even more toxically your own catalog. You see these documentaries of like, I remember seeing Michael Jackson like drawing on his mirror, like when he was trying to beat Thriller. I can't remember the number, but he's like, he wrote it on the mirror, like, I'm going to sell X amount of records. And of course he did.
Right.
But it's like, man, that type of pressure, I don't know. I can't speak for him, obviously, or any other artist, but for me, that's just going to hamper whatever's supposed to happen that day.
Yes.
That type of comparison is probably just going to really work against you as opposed to inspire you. And I don't know, art happens in the moment, and it happens naturally when it's supposed to happen. So kind of easing into that reality.
And what's really interesting is it's still kind of audiences are still kind of a black box in some way, in that you never really know what is going to really strike an audience and get their attention. I think a really good example of that is with Spotify. You have all these algorithmic tools that can really drive what music is in front of a large swath of listeners, right? But
Yeah.
even I know a ton of bands that have their music has hit that algorithm in some way where it's gotten in front of a large number of people, and yet it still hasn't translated into a large number of people that become fans of that band, that consume all their music, that want to come to the shows. And that's because you can't make people like a type of music just by putting it in front of them is not going to make them fall in love with a work of art. And what makes them fall in love with a work of art is something that we still don't know, that is not a science. And if we did know it, then we'd all be, much richer than we are.
Right. I agree. And I also think this might be an offshoot of what you're saying, or it might be exactly what you're talking about. But, creating music in an attempt to capture a certain audience is a whole other game than just creating the art that's inside of you.
Yes.
And I think that the first, creating music to say, for me to sit here, for you to sit in your studio and be like, man, I want to make a record that my fans will love next. Like, I wonder what they want me to make next.
Right.
It's such a horrible question.
Right.
To me, in my opinion, my job is to sit here and be like, what is next for me? It's a selfish art. What is next? What do I want to say? What is trying to come out of me? And then, yeah, of course I'm a human. I hope people like it. I hope it sells. I hope it fucking blows up. I hope I sell out theaters all across the world. I have all those desires like we all do. But if you start with the question, what do people want, as opposed to who am I? What do I want to say? Not to judge that path. It's just it's a whole different path with a whole different outcome.
Well, yeah. And I don't think there's anything to be judged about that at all, because I think the most important artists that have ever walked the face of the earth are artists that they tell the audience what the audience wants. The audience doesn't know what it wants until you put it in front of them. Now, the audience can recognize it and be like, oh, yeah, that's what I want. But they couldn't tell you ahead of time. That's your job to kind of to make something that resonates with you and then put it before them. No one knew that they wanted Thriller before Thriller came out, because nothing had really been made like that before. But as soon as you play it for them, it's like an atomic bomb going off. Yeah,
a great point. That's a great point.
I heard an interview with Quincy Jones. Is it on Thriller where that track itself, where there like the beat and the bass come in for like 30 seconds to a minute before the song actually gets going? Am I wrong there?
Is that Billie Jean?
That might be Billie Jean. Okay. So that's what he was talking about.
Which is Thriller. Yeah.
So Quincy Jones was saying, like, as the producer, he mentioned to Michael Jackson, like, hey, this is kind of like a long intro. Maybe we chop this down a little bit. And Michael Jackson said, well, but this is the part that makes me want to dance. And Quincy Jones, being a great producer, said at that point, well, you don't cut the thing out of the song that Michael Jackson says makes him want to dance. You know what I mean? And that
So
was kind of
true.
a way of saying, like, they were making a record that Michael really liked, and because it ended up becoming the quintessential record that Michael loved, that's what the world ended up loving.
Yeah, well said. I mean, that's true, and good on Quincy for. That's a great producer move too.
It is, because that idea of just like, hey, we got to cut this, get it down. That is like, if you were to decide tomorrow, like, hey, I'm going to be a producer, that would be like the first, that'd be like your first note that you give somebody, right? It's like, man,
Yeah,
it's like,
got to cut some fat out of this.
got to get to the punch,
I
man.
can't remember what. My wife is a '90s country music connoisseur. I didn't know there was such a thing as country music till I was 13 years old.
Okay.
Because I was from Massachusetts, and it just wasn't part of my upbringing. So she will often educate me on everything I missed out on. And we were listening to a song last night, and I was like, "Holy shit, this song's still going on! Like, what?
Yeah.
How long is this song?" And she's like, she looked at the times, whatever. It was like a 6-minute song, and it was a single on the radio. I was just like, can you imagine? Like, God, I wish. I mean, there's some cool shit going on in the 90s in country music, like some real storytelling, some real, or like, I guess in any genre, just like, it's all under 3 minutes now because that's just the format. But, yeah, I'm going off on a tangent just because I was
but
so
it's also a
excited
changing audience. I don't think that, to me, is probably not, the powers that be in the music business cramming that down on listeners. I think it's probably listeners' appetites, sparking what the business is responding to. And I think, people's ability to pay attention in 2021 is probably a lot different than it was in 1991.
Yeah, you're right. You are right.
Speaking for myself, I mean, I'm trying to read a lot more. I used to read all the time. And reading now, I feel like if I haven't put the book down to check my phone after 10 minutes, I feel like I've done something worthy of a Nobel Peace Prize at that point. Didn't used to be like that.
The phone is an issue. The phone is a bad thing. It's a bad good thing.
It's a bad
but I
good
hear
thing.
That for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like you can. The good thing is, like, you can apply for a mortgage on your phone, so you don't have to spend 16 hours of your life chasing down pieces of physical paper and file cabinets all around your house. So that's awesome. But then
right.
What you end up doing with that 16 hours that you got back is just looking at other people's lives in a feed, which is probably not great.
It is. It will be a very interesting study, the long-term ramifications of the intensity and the length at which we all stare at these little cubes in our hands.
No, really. It really will. So before we wrap up here, talk to me a little bit about how this new record of yours is different sonically, what you tried to bring to the table with it. I know you had the Wood Brothers on at this latest, the first single that came out. What did you end up accomplishing sonically on this record that maybe you hadn't in the past?
I tried on the engineering side, on the recording end, I tried to go more minimalistic than, to me, Secondhand Smoke was a very swimmy kind of cinematic. There was a lot of ear candy, not just for the sake of it. I think it suited the record, but I kind of went all the way in that direction with it. And so kind of for my own excitement and keeping things fresh, I wanted to go the other way with this one. So I tracked everything pretty minimalistic as far as there are overdubs, but they're not gratuitous. And I definitely didn't use a lot of reverbs this time around as far as when I was recording it, now that it's been mixed by Justin Tockett, who did a fucking phenomenal job. He kind of brought some more of that spaciness back into it. But it kind of helped me on the front end of recording it to almost treat it like it was, not a throwback record. There's nothing really retro about it, but just the mentality of just don't put anything on here that don't just assume that it needs a this or that, or a doubled guitar pass, or a super swimmy reverb sound for the vocal. Like, just mic everything up pretty honestly, and just let it be what it is.
That has to be really hard, though, because in the moment, as you're working on a song and listening to playback in the room, obviously you want to hear it in a certain way. Like, you're like, all right, let me put a bunch of stuff on the stereo bus here so it sounds exactly like I need it to sound.
Totally.
So was that hard to kind of still your hand from doing that stuff?
At first, it was kind of exciting. It almost did that for me to not do it, if that makes sense. Like, the sounds coming out were different because I wasn't doing all this stuff to him. So that sonically was exciting to me. As the process went on, and once we got into mixing, I kind of realized that I took the rule too far, in that, or I shouldn't say that. When it got to mixing, I think what Justin did by not adhering to those rules of like reverbs and making things kind of psychedelic at times really served the record. When I listened back to just my roughs, I was like, I've done a really good job of doing this, but I think for it to really speak, there are some things in the mix that will bring it to a whole other level. So I think it worked. They both did what they were supposed to do, because handing the super raw project over to somebody to do their thing with it allowed his brain to do things. I wasn't informing him very much with effects as much as just, hopefully good performances and great sounding tracks. So yeah, it was a lot of learning curve for me, but it was fun. It was fun to do something different.
I love the Wood Brothers. I toured with them years and years ago, and they're just such great musicians, such great songwriters, such great dudes. How did you end up hooked up with them for this record? And how did you guys end up working? Not how did you end up working together, but what was the process like working with those guys?
I met the Wood Brothers opening for them. I guess this would have been a couple of years ago. I did like a month or a month and a half on the road with them, and just really fell in love with their music and them as people. And it was one of my favorite touring experiences. I mean, those fucking cats are mind-boggling, mind-bending musicians. I've opened for a lot of bands, but I was definitely out there every night learning everything I could and soaking it up, because every single one of them, there's just no weak link. They're all just crazy good.
It's like a 6-piece band, but it's a power trio,
Yeah, it's absolutely unbelievable. It's 3 people, and you would just never know it. It doesn't hurt that Jono is a freaking octopus and plays the drums and keys at the same time, and it sounds like there's literally 2 guys doing it. So yeah, I toured with them. We hit it off. We became, buds, and kept in touch over the years, especially with Oliver. And I just heard them on the song pretty early on in my head. I was like, God, this would be so cool to have them on it. And they're gracious enough to do it. And Jono and Oliver came over. This is kind of early on, so we were definitely all masked up and like taking like super extra precautions.
Sure.
Like separate microphones and stuff like that. But yeah, they were here. They came to the studio, and we sang through sometimes and figured out what parts. And then Chris sent his part in from I think he was in Colorado. I can't remember. But yeah, it was a blast to have them in the studio and hear those voices come through the speakers in my own place was a real trip.
Well, man, the record just sounds great. Congratulations on the new release, and thanks for coming back on the show, man. It's great to hear your voice.
Dude, thanks for having me. It's such an honor, and always stoked to be asked. It really is. I love your podcast, and it's really great to catch up with you too.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Sean McConnell's latest album is entitled A Horrible, Beautiful Dream, available everywhere music is sold or streamed on August 6th of this year. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.